Hello, my name is Rob. We are going to go over some HTTP functions today with Fellow. I'm going to share my screen and walk you through kind of just how to get started with HTTP functions in Fellow. Documentation is available at Wix. HTTP functions. You can go to wix.com/Fellow. This URL and pull it up, or just follow along with this video and we'll dive in. To explain a little bit about why you would want to do this and what this does, the way the web works generally is you have servers and you have clients. You can think of clients like a browser, a web browser on your desktop, on your mobile phone, etc. Every time you pull up a URL for a website that you want to visit, that is a browser making an HTTP request to a server in search of some information, some data, and that request itself within the HTTP request is a GET request, which is what we're going to get started with today. And that GET request returns a response, in most cases, that either contains the data you're looking for or an error message about why, what's going wrong, why that data is not there. Is it a server connection issue? Does it have to do with is the just data not there? In the case of like a 400 level or 404 error message. How this relates to your site, often in many cases, people will want to expose their databases or their database collections, in our case, to third-party websites or app developers or etc. to make use of your data in another application. Like in our case, I have put together this really cool table, which is connected to a database collection with a series of countries and flags and external URLs for those flag images and scores. A hypothetical kind of World Cup scenario where you would want to kind of keep track of how all these teams are doing in the tournament. You can, on the front end of this site that I made, update the score of any of these here. If the country is not present in the table, you can add it through this update score method. And you can also delete any of the fields in this table or delete the most recent score. But how do we make the data in this table accessible to a third party? They could theoretically get the HTML on the front end of the site and parse that and have access to this from the very front end. But often, if you are doing more complicated queries just beyond a GET request, if you are making modifications to that database, you generally wouldn't be able to get very far with just accessing the HTML. You would need a connection to the database where this table is being filled from. So to do that in Wix, we are going to want to create, expose some functions that can be called by a third party to make GET requests, to make put requests, delete requests, etc. Through our HTTP functions. So I have set up some of these rudimentary ones already for GET, put, post, delete. But today we're going to go kind of rebuild this over just for a GET request to get up and running with how we would make our country's table accessible to another third-party client. So the first thing we are going to want to do, this is probably not what you're seeing if you're opening your Wix site for the first time. You're probably seeing something more like this. You're going to want to go up here to dev mode and turn on dev mode. I already have it on, so my option says turn off. But if you're going to see a dev mode up here, you're going to see a brighter blue button that says turn on dev mode, and you're going to want to click that, which opens up this bar over here, as well as a little text editor, integrated development environment down here at the bottom where you can write your JavaScript code for Velo. So to get started with our functions, we are going to want to import a database. You can't, make a GET request to a database and get data back if you don't have that data present in the database to begin with. So I already have this countries data already present. We saw in the table on the front end that I showed earlier. But in the event that you don't, you can just click on database here, go to content collections, click on this plus sign and add a new database collection. That is going to give you the option to name a database. We will call this countries 0. And we want to make sure that the multiple items default is selected, which is what we want to ensure that your database can accept more than one item. And then that will just be an empty database. You will want to click this More Actions button up here to import items to your database. I'm going to include a link to this database CSV file, which is kind of the easiest way to import and export data to database collections within Wix. I'm going to include that in the YouTube video description for this, but yeah, it's also available on the Wix website. It's just a slightly modified version of the country's data that you can find in the documentation. You can also export your CSV file from your data in the form of a CSV file. CSV file is a file format, stands for comma separated values, and it's pretty popular with Microsoft Excel and with other kind of table database oriented software. But yeah, so once you have your data entered here, I'm going to go ahead and delete this one because we already have our data imported. To delete, you just click these 3 buttons here, 3 dots, and click remove collection there. So now that we have our data present, we want to start writing our functions. And to do that, we are going to, you got to be kind of specific with Wix, specific with the location that is stored in on Wix. The best place, kind of best practice that we have worked out is to go to the public and backend section of the editor and to add a new file specifically called http-functions.js into your backend editor here. I have all the pre-written code that I've prepared in one called http functions old, but you're going to want to use http-functions.js. And that ensures that you can access the data at the following URL. This is going to be, unique to your site, but if you look at the documentation, there is a sort of template for how this is accessible, and your data will not be accessible at this URL endpoint if you don't store it. You don't store your function in the right same place that I'm describing. So just something to be mindful of. But to continue, so once you have gone into public and backend, created a file called http-functions.js, now we can get started writing code. So we are going to find that file in our editor here. I like to maximize it when I'm not really dealing with the visual editor and just working in code. And we are going to want to import 2 APIs from the greater Wix Velo API. Those are the Wix HTTP functions and the Wix data API. So like anything else in Node.js and JavaScript generally, you want to use the import keyword, and you want to import certain things from these APIs. In our case, we want to import Wix data. from the Wix data API. And we want to import a series of functions from the Wix HTTP function module. We're using a pair of curly brackets because we're parsing them ahead of time. They come in kind of an object notation, and this parses it. We want to import the OK function, the not found function, and the server error function. It functions plural. Yeah, everything has to be spelled right. Always something good to keep in mind. But yeah, so next we want to start writing our function to get the countries from our database. And as with the import keyword, we also want to make sure that we're using the export keyword for our function to make it accessible outside of this specific JavaScript file, which is true of Node.js and JavaScript generally. But yeah, you really got to make sure that you don't forget that export keyword. I've definitely made a lot of applications where I forgot that and spent hours debugging and trying to figure out why it wasn't accessible. But the way that I like to think about this kind of HTTP functions is it's kind of a dialogue between the browser, the client, and the server that you're communicating with. We are using something called HTTP, which stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And because it's a protocol, it's sort of a series of rules that computers follow when they're communicating in this HTTP way, request response cycle. And we want to make sure that we're sort of adhering to that language. We're sending our messages in the right language, and we're receiving them in the right way as well, just to kind of keep to these standards. And not only is it best practices, but it just won't work if you don't. So it's really important to follow the rules of this protocol. So to get started doing that, and I'm just working right from the documentation, I should say. You can go to this URL, and we're going to be making a GET request, but it is just an example, a second GET example here for creating a GET HTTP function. So we want to pass a request parameter into our function that we just set up. And within that, this is just sort of the code that is being passed in when a client, a third-party user that is making use of our database, they're passing a bit of HTTP in as a request. And we're kind of constructing a response to their request. In this funny dialogue metaphor that I'm not sure really works on every level, but roll with it. So we want to start crafting our message for the response on this options object. We are going to make a variable called options, and we want to add headers, which is just a key value pair. Headers being the key, the value is an object, and inside of that object, we want to specify what content type we're working with. Just so when we're responding, we are letting the computer system know that we're working with a specific kind of JavaScript called JSON, which is for JavaScript object notation. And it just is a common web standard for communication of this sort. XML is another really popular one, but for now, we're working with JSON. So we want to specify applications JSON, which is just straight from the documentation right here. Actually, application singular. That will trip you up. So now to get to our database query itself, we want to make use of this Wix data object that we imported, and we want to return a value eventually. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, which hopefully you are, every function you will generally have a return keyword, which is it allows you to output data from the function. So every time the function is called and you want to sort of do some kind of computation, you're going to generally want to return a value that will be your output for the function. Functions tend to rely on a kind of input-output model. If you want to do some computation and have an output, to output that, you use the return keyword. So we are using return keyword here, and then we're doing Wix data.query, which is just a keyword within our API that queries the database. We need to specify which database we want to query, which I have called it countries in my case, because it's a bunch of countries in a database. But if yours is named differently, please make sure to adhere to that. And in terms of capitalization, make sure you get that right, because that can also trip you up. Once we query the database, we want to kind of go through a sequence of different steps to ensure that the data from the query is returned in kind of the proper format. This is called a promise, which is something in JavaScript to kind of ensure things are run in a synchronous order. Functions specifically are run in a synchronous order, or methods. With JavaScript generally, things kind of run whenever they're called in terms of functions, and because we want to ensure that these run in a specific order, we want to query the database and only run the next step in the recipe after we receive that data back from the database. Then we want to construct our response in the proper HTTP format. So it's critical that we have it run in this specific order, and we want to rely on this promise format to do so. So to do that, we want to kind of string together these methods, find being the next one, and then being the next one, then just kind of implying the next in order. Often people will write these out kind of left to right, and these promise chains can get quite long. So it's becoming increasingly common to see people, hit the return key right there and enter at a line break, which I like to do because it's a little bit cleaner, but it runs just the same. So we have a find. I believe the API documentation has, a couple of parameters here where they are making specific searches for just the first name in their database and the last name in their database, which I am not really going to bother with right now for the time being, because our database is just so small. I think it has about 10 or 11 entries, and this is more to economize your database queries, which can get, if your database is quite large, can be computationally expensive and make your site a little bit slower, which is definitely something to be mindful of if you're working with a big database. But in our case, for example purposes, etc., isn't really quite necessary. But anyway, so inside of our then function, we want to start putting together a kind of message to go inside of this options object that we're eventually going to send in response with the data to transmit the data to the client requesting it. So we are going to create a function here. This is an arrow function, which is one of the more recent JavaScript developments within the last 5 or so years, as opposed to kind of the function keyword declaration here. And then we want to import the results parameter, or pass in the results parameter, I should say. And we want to start building out a couple cases that make use of these HTTP functions for the GET request. So, you know, in the best of circumstances, you are going to want to have an OK status code, which, you know, returns the data, and it gives the 200 level status code generally that says to the client browser that everything went smoothly with this GET request. We also are eventually going to build out a not found case in the event that you are querying a database, but not finding what you're looking for with this query, as well as a server error in which the database can't be connected with at all. Not found queries are generally like 400 level. You can think of like a 404 web page error if you've ever gone to a website where, you know, the page you're looking for isn't present, but the site itself is, and the database is also present. And a server error is generally like 500 level. That just means that like the connection to the database itself is faltering in some capacity. So in our case, we want to modify this options object at options.body. We're going to add a new kind of body key similar to this headers. And we want to get the items from the result. So inside of here, we're going to write items. This should be in quotes. And then we want for the value to be result SUL not items. Items is a keyword that's already on the results, so I'm just kind of reusing that here. But if you look at the documentation, it is also what they're using here. And outside of this, we want to make use of our OK function that we're importing here, like I was saying before. So we're going to want to return OK options. So if we save that and publish it, we know that our database is there. So now if we go to this URL, we should receive the data. But we need to be a little bit more careful and make use of these not found in server error functions to build in some kind of error handling in the event that you maybe make a call to a database that isn't present, or especially when you're querying for specific like first name, last name parameters, you want to give a little bit of a error handling kind of thing where you can kind of give a custom message whether or not that that query connected to the database versus just did connect it and found something, and versus connected to it and not found something, versus not connected to the database at all. So the easiest way to kind of do that is to, as noted in the documentation, to wrap this in a if-else statement. So we want to keep this positive case here for the event that it is connecting to the database. Where did this go? That's weird. So if this is a true statement, then we want to run, if we know that there's something in the database already from our query, then we want to, you know, give the green light 200 status code and populate this object with the data that we got found. So the way that this is done in documentation, and I generally agree with the documentation, is to check the results dot item. The same thing we're getting here. If there's anything in there, the easiest way to do it is probably with the length method. This should be result. So if there is any length at all, if the length of the array is greater than 0, then you know that you have something there that you're looking for. You want to use this affirmative case. Otherwise, you are going to do something else with this options.body method or object. So we are going to do options.body. And we want to, rather than add items to the options object, we'll add error and say something like result.items was not found. Just to give another developer who's working on their third-party app a little bit of a heads up about, so they know that they're getting a connection, but not getting the data they're looking for. So we also, as we're doing here, want to return our status codes. So we want to grab this not found and return TURN not found and pass options in with our new message. And then in this other case, we are going to want to build out the option where we're not making any connection to our database at all. And that's going to be an addition to our promise here as a catch block. If you are familiar with JavaScript, you know that it makes use of, or one possibility is you can use try catch blocks within JavaScript, which allow you to, within a function, provide two possible cases. Try being the kind of affirmative, like try this first. And in the event that this fails, you can run the catch case, which will generally build in some kind of resistance against errors or give a developer a little bit more understanding of like what's going wrong, what's going on here. So in our case, we want to use that try catch block to ensure that we are connecting to our server at all, because it's totally possible that we're making a call to our server, to our database, and there's just no database there or no connection being made. So we want to craft a similar options.body message and return this function server error with the options message. And similar to this error message, we are also going to call this error, and then we will say, what does the documentation say? They are passing in the parameter error here and just logging that error. Cool. So now we should be able to publish these changes, and I might just press return here to be consistent with the style of the promise. And we can go to, so right in the documentation, there are two URLs that you can go to if you have a premium site or a free site to sort of simulate what a third party would see if they're making these GET requests, through their app or their website. We're just kind of pretending to be somebody else and going to the free site URL because we have a free site right now. So if you go to this and you go like your site name, your URL, site name, underscore functions, which gives you access to the backend here if you named your file name http-functions.js, and then looks for something inside of that called function name. In our case, we have this, we have the underscore functions, and then countries, because we named our file our function get countries. So you can just grab countries here. The browser generally is making GET requests, and we have our data. This is everything here, but it's more, it's just the raw data that a site could theoretically use if they wanted to build their own front end and not have this kind of cheesy web design that I put together fairly quickly, but wanted to make, a more dynamic app with a little bit more interactivity, perhaps, and eventually, like theoretically, with the rest of this documentation, you could build it out such that they would be able to make contributions to this database and this data set. They could make a put request or a post request to modify the data inside of these objects to basically do what I was doing here with the update score and the delete score. So a third party could add another country in here, or update the score on a pre-existing country, or delete a country from this list. There's always security concerns with stuff like this, and you have full control over that within your site. But yeah, this is generally kind of the first step toward making something like that possible. And you can also, you don't have to test this in the browser directly. One thing that I like to do with more complex HTTP functions is to grab this URL and test it in an API kind of client like Postman. Within Postman, if you want to download it, it's a free web application to download. You can just open up a new what do they call it? New window, new tab, and find GET request here, which is sort of what I was just describing before. Enter the URL that you need to, same as the browser, then press send, and you should receive exactly the same data that you are getting over here in the browser. And I should say that this is a little bit more stylish than you would probably see it, because I have a plugin here called JSON view, which cleans this up a little bit, makes it sort of linear. Otherwise, it kind of is just a big, ugly hunk of data. So I would definitely recommend that plugin or Chrome extension. But Postman has a lot of really good styling options as well. You can see the raw data here, which is same stuff, just a little bit uglier. You can preview website, like what it would look like on the web, all sorts of stuff like that. And you can see from that function we had 200 level status code, meaning okay, meaning the data is there, and that's doing everything that we want. If we added, I've sort of tested out some parameters here, but if we added a parameter where we made a search for another country in here that wasn't present, we would have to build out that functionality again in this example, but you would get like a different status code based on the response that you got from those functions that we set up. But that is kind of enough, I think, to get you started building out this kind of functionality for your site, just to ensure that your data is all accessible to third-party clients and safe in this instance, because you're not really working with post, put, delete stuff that would possibly a third party could destructively damage the data in your database. But you totally have all the options to do something like that, even securely through the fellow reference here with all the guide to the documentation for our API. But yeah, this was a really quick and dirty example, but there's a lot more you can do with all of these features in our documentation, and I really can't wait to see what you guys put together with all of the cool features that this product has, and what Velo has, and all the different directions you can take something like this in. But thank you so much for being here and watching this video with me. It's been so much fun. Can't wait to see what you guys put together.